Because now chapter 11 starts out. He said, and there was given me a reed like unto a rod. And the angel stood, saying, rise and measure the temple of God, and the altar, and them that worship therein. But the court which is without the temple leave out, and measure it not. For it is given unto the Gentiles, and the holy city shall be tread under foot 42 months. The third temple. John is told to get up and to measure this temple. Your handouts show you the temples that have already been put forth in Israel. Now, what I've given to you is a cross section because I couldn't copy this. What you have, the very first page from the Jewish Encyclopedia, is what was called Solomon's Temple. Solomon's Temple was the first temple that was made. That was the son of David, Solomon. The temple that he made was the first temple that was created in order for the Jewish people to come and to worship God. We know before that, in the wilderness, they had what was called the tabernacle. And it moved from place to place under Moses. But all the things in the tabernacle were foreshadowed. And those things were remade and placed into the temple on a more permanent basis. The temple was permanent, where the tabernacle moved from place to place. Well, when they finally got to the promised land, they tore down the tabernacle, and it was no more. Now they were looking for a place of permanent worship, and that's when the temple of Solomon was built. And David was the one who had gathered most of the material for it, but he couldn't build it. Because God said, you are a warrior, a bloody man. You killed many people, but your son is of peace. And because of it, he can build my temple. So David had all of the material, but Solomon was the one that actually built and dedicated the temple. And like I said, you've got a cross section that looks at it. This is what it looked like in color. It was gold all over. They estimate the cost of this between $8 to $10 billion is what it cost to make the first temple. The Temple of Solomon was estimated to be anywhere from $8 to $10 billion. And I mean, when I say overlaid with gold, almost everything in there was gold. Because when they would light a candlelight, it would light up the whole room because it was gold. It would shine off of everything. What wasn't gold was silver. So all of these were reflective things that would reflect the light. So they light a candlestick and it would light up the whole thing because that's what it was about. There was no such thing as light like this. They used candlelight. Everything that was in there was operated by candlelight. So it had to be on walls that would reflect light. So everything that God had them to do was made of gold. All the way down to the mercy seat that was overlaid with gold. It was made of shittim wood, but it was overlaid with gold. Pure gold. The same gold that he used to make that stuff that he said he threw in the fire, and all of a sudden a golden calf came out? Yeah, right. That same gold was what they used to make this. Pure gold, fired, refined, purified gold. And that's what they used to make this temple. So when you entered in, everything was of gold. All the way through. Then there were places where the priests would sleep because they would stay there for 6 months. And then they would go back to their house. And then they would come back again for another 6 months. And then they would go to their house while the other priests would come. They split it up into 6-month intros. One group of priests would come for 6 months and they'd stay here. And whoever brought stuff in, as far as calves and stuff, they would take their portion out. If you brought in money or barley or leaf, they would take their portion out, offer the rest up unto God. And then the other portion that they had was a portion that they ate and fed those that were in the temple with. The choir members, all of them, everybody was in it. Everybody had a room. So this place was huge. It wasn't some little bitty place. It was big. And it had 3 floors to it where they would be and where the high priest was in relationship to everything. And this thing was, the ceiling was so high. It was like 90 feet high, the ceiling. This thing was huge. And it was so long. This place of worship, when you walked in here, you would be walking for a while. But you couldn't do it. You had either the outer court or you were in the inner court, depending upon your position. You were a Levite, you could go to the inner court. And then special priests could go into the holy place. Then the only special priest could go into the Holy of Holies, and that was the high priest. But that's what that temple looked like. And it gives you a picture of all the things that I could not copy this. It's too much color. Then they had one of the temple of Herod. That's your second page. Your second page shows you the temple of Herod. And it shows basically the same thing of how they would walk in and where the holy place was, where the Holy of Holies was. You had the outer court. Then they had a court where the women were, where only women could go. They couldn't go all over the place. They could only go to a special place. They would have their court. The place of the Gentiles was on the outer portion. They couldn't enter into the wall. Not the Gentiles. They couldn't go in. Then the women could only go so far. Only men were allowed into the inner court. And then the priests were allowed into the holy place. And then the high priest was allowed into the Holy of Holies. You had certain places where you could go. And if you weren't designated to go, you died. So the Temple of Solomon got wiped out by the Babylonians. When the Babylonians took Israel captive, they wiped out the temple. Well, then we see Nehemiah and Ezra go rebuild. And as they were trying to repair the walls, rebuild, and everything else, later on came Herod. King Herod had the money and the backing of Rome, and he rebuilt the temple completely, totally. Rebuilt the place of worship. It was not the same as what was in the original. Some things had changed, but they tried to keep as much as they possibly could because some of the walls were destroyed. Even though Nehemiah and them tried to rebuild everything, they didn't. So they tried to put everything back the same way it was in Solomon's temple. The innermost parts were pretty much the same. It's just some of the outer parts were different, especially the walls. So when they did this in Herod's temple, it looks a little bit different, and you could see it on the structure. It looks a little bit different than that of Solomon's temple. But it still had a lot of the gold, but then some of the gold had been replaced with bronze. And we know bronze and brass is not as shiny as gold is. And it's not as pricey, because he didn't have all that money. He didn't have $10 billion to do what Solomon did. He didn't have as much money. He had the backing of Rome to do it, but he had the money from Rome to do it. So the money that they had, some of the things that they put back in this was less as far as the cost and as far as its features than it was of gold. So that's why it doesn't look as gold as the one that we saw earlier that was of Solomon's temple. That was almost completely from front to back made of gold or overlaid in gold. Where this one is not as shiny because it had more bronze and more brass. This temple was destroyed in 70 AD by the Romans. When they overtook Jerusalem, they destroyed the temple, wiped it out. This is what we see today up on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. There's nothing left but a Wailing Wall, the west wall, which is on this side. That's all that's left, that wall. And you see them walk through those squares every day to this wall to pray. That one day the temple will be rebuilt. One day on the Temple Mount, they would have an opportunity to rebuild this temple. Well, the only problem that they have with that is that there's something in the way. And what's in the way is the third most holiest site in the Islamic faith on the Temple Mount. It is the Dome of the Mount that sits right in Jerusalem, right above the Temple Mount. And in order for Israel, now Israel still semi controls it. The Palestinians are trying to get the British and the United States there to give full claim to them of the Temple Mount, but they won't give it to them. Because if they had full authority of the Temple Mount, they would make sure Israel never rebuilt the temple in that site. But something's going to happen. Earthquake, a bomb, something's going to blow that thing to smithereens. And Israel is going to rebuild the temple. And according to Ezekiel, they have to rebuild the temple. Because it was given to Ezekiel that this temple be rebuilt. Because the same design as David got and gave to Solomon, and the same design that Herod got, God had given vision to Ezekiel about a coming temple that hadn't been done. Even though he got this vision way before Herod, but this was not Herod's temple. This was a temple to come. And this is the third temple that's going to be rebuilt in Israel. Because Israel in the last days are going to go back. The more Orthodox Jews are going to go back to the side. Right now, they're learning rabbinical studies. They're going back into the Old Testament, all the way from Exodus to Deuteronomy. And they're learning the priesthood. They've got 11, 12, 13-year-old young men that are going through the priesthood from Exodus to Deuteronomy to learn how to do the priesthood, how to offer up the sacrifices, what the sacrifices are, how to take in the daily ministration, everything, how to run the temple. They're learning this. They're getting this because a third temple is going to be rebuilt. Now, whether it's going to come through a peace treaty or whether it's going to come through outright force, we don't know. Or whether it's going to come supernaturally. Somehow the whole temple might crumble in. We don't know how it's going to happen. Only thing we know is it's going to happen. Because underground, they're already starting to build the wall. What they're waiting for is a red heifer. You know what a heifer is, right? Not what you call for, you heifer. No, that's not it. It's a cow. It's a female cow. A young female cow. And they're red. Now, they have some that are in Montana, but they're not quite red. Sort of like a crimson color. And not real red. They need a red heifer. Because the first sacrifice that's offered on that altar has to be the sacrifice of the red heifer. And the ashes must be from that, of a red heifer that has to be sprinkled on that altar in order to get it started. There's a gentleman that says he has one. He's out in Wyoming. It says he has two. And Israel is looking into it. And if they are pure red heifers, they will get them. They will keep them. Because I guarantee you, if that wall is built and an earthquake or something happens and that Temple Mount falls, or a bomb goes off and blows up the Temple Mount, believe you me, they're going to build the rest of that wall. And when they do, that temple that Ezekiel spoke about, already the design, the total design, what size it ought to be, how this ought to go, what needs to be in here, everything. There will be only one thing missing. Who knows what it'll be? There'll be only one thing missing. Anybody knows what it is? Come on, scholars. Talk to me. There will be only one thing missing in this temple. And we already saw it. We already know about it. We already heard about it. We already know what happened to it. But what is it? The Ark of the Covenant. Why is it missing? Is where? It's in heaven. Remember when Christ died, the curtain split, and this doesn't happen. It didn't split from top to bottom. It split from the bottom to the top. This thing was so interwoven till it would take horses, 6 horses going that direction, 6 horses going that direction, in order to pull this thing apart. Because it was interwoven with gold and silk, everything. The tapestry was so beautiful and purple. I mean, it was just so heavy. No hand touched it. And it split when Christ died from top to, and the Holy of Holies was opened up. Nobody's supposed to see that but the high priest. Everybody out there was able to look and see it. Then it was taken away. Never to be seen again by man. Gone. We know it's here because we saw it in Revelation. It's in heaven. The testimony of God is in heaven. That's where it is. And it's coming back when he comes back, because he will tabernacle with us. And the temple of God will be our temple. And it won't be so much a physical place of going in and out of. It will be the presence of the Lord. And that's where the ark will be, because it has no reason now. His presence was already be here. His presence will already be a part of it. So when you see the presence of the Lord, you will know what his presence is all about. And you will be able to experience his presence. So that's the only thing that's missing. In the temple will be the Ark of the Covenant, the testimony. And within those testimonies are 3 things. Remember what the 3 things were in the testimony? You remember what the 3 things were in the ark? There was 3 things in the ark.
The candlestick?
Huh?
The candlestick? What?
Huh? What staff? It was Aaron's staff that had budded. It was an almond staff that was put before the ark, and nobody says it wasn't rooted in the ground, nothing. But when they came back, it had budded, almonds on it. Now, that's supposed to be a dead staff, but God made it live, and it wasn't even a root in the ground. That was put in the ark to show God's provision as made. What else was in it? Ten Commandments were put in there. Show God's law. What else? And it's amazing how long this thing lasted. All this time, this thing lasted.
Where would you find all this information
Huh?
at? Which book would you find all this?
It was not in one book. It's in various places. And I'm going to give you those scriptures when I give you the outline. But I won't going to give it to you yet. But I'm going to give you the outline. I'm going to give you all that stuff. But you'll find it in various places of where the Ark of the Covenant, where the Ten Commandments were put in it, where the budding staff was put in it, and where this third thing was put in it. There's Old and New Testament references to tell you about all the things that's in there. What's that third thing? When you hear, you're going to go, what? How in the world? Yeah. How could it have lasted all of that time? And it wasn't like they got it, knew it. No. It was that one time, and it was put in there. And it speaks of perseverance. Y'all want to say it, but you're thinking that you shouldn't say it. But you want to say it, and it's right. Say it. Huh?
Was it a communion?
Not the communion, but what else? What bread?
The unleavened? Is the,
What came before that?
The man,
Manna.
oh,
Manna.
I remember.
How in the world? Manna. Remember they were given manna when they left Egypt and was out in the middle of the desert. From that time until the time that this thing was in, that manna was still in there. It didn't rotten. Didn't have cankerworm. Now, I keep a loaf of bread. Huh?
you said, especially you said it was
No.
okay.
Yeah.
I knew it was had something to eat or something.
Yeah, it was something to eat, but not chicken. that would have been if it had been a black ark. We probably would have been some chicken in there, some ribs. We would have had a walking staff. Yeah, that would have worked, you know. But the manna, and the manna was given to them years before Christ came to the earth. And so this manna was in this thing, all this from the time of David, Solomon, Hezekiah, all these kings, all this going away. It was in here to the time of Rome taking over. That manna was in that ark. And the budded almond staff that Aaron had was in the ark. It didn't go away. It didn't die off. The almonds didn't dry rot. Nothing. Still in there. 100% still in there. Holistically. Tells you about the preservation. Remember, Israel was in the wilderness for how long? 40 years. Did they need a new set of clothes? No. Clothes didn't dry rot in the desert. No. Shoes didn't get where the laces start falling off. God completely preserved them for 40 years. That's what happened up under the ark. God showed complete preservation and let them know that this was what they were supposed to have been doing. So here's what they were doing in those three. First, they were to measure the temple. They were to measure the temple place of Jewish worship. Then they were to measure the altar. Place of prayer. Sacrifice. Then they were to measure the worshipers. People that were doing the worship. But they were not to measure the court. Two reasons why. Because the court was given to the Gentiles. And the holy city was to be trodden for 42 months. How long is 42 months? Three and a half years. Watch that. Because we're going to see that a whole lot. 3.5 years. 42 months. We're going to see that a whole lot coming up now. A lot of references to 3.5. A lot of references to 3.5. Because either they're going to be entering a 3.5 or going out of a 3.5. They're either going to be protected for 3.5 or going to be prosecuted for 3.5. They're either going to be delivered for 3.5 or delivered into for 3.5. You know, both of those 3.5s together make up the 7 years of tribulation. And then 3.5 years of what's called the Great Tribulation. Now remember, we talked about the third temple. We talked about the temple period. That Gentiles could not enter into the temple ground or the court. Well, here they are in the court. They're going to be in the court. That's a desecration for Gentiles to be in the Jewish court of the temple. They're not supposed to be there. But they are, because they're going to do something pretty soon. We can't talk about it now, but they're going to do something pretty soon. We're going to see it. It's something that they're going to do to really pollute this place, to completely, almost completely desecrate this place. Since they can't just tear it down, they're going to do something to desecrate it and pollute it, to almost make it of no effect anymore. Any questions about the temple? The third temple. favorite friends, the two witnesses. Starting at verse 3. It says, "And I will give power unto my two witnesses, and they shall prophesy 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. These are the two olive trees and the two candlesticks standing before the God of the earth. And if any man will hurt them, fire proceedeth out of their mouth, and devoureth their enemies. And if any man will hurt them, they must in this manner be killed. These have power to shut heaven, that it rain not in the days of their prophecy, and have power over water to turn them into blood, and to smite the earth with all plagues as often as they will. And when they shall have finished their testimony, the beast that ascended out of the bottomless pit shall make war against them, and shall overcome them, and kill them. And their bodies shall lie in the street of the great city, which is spiritually called Sodom and Egypt, where also our Lord was crucified. And they of the people and kindreds and tongues and nations shall see their bodies 3 days and a half, and shall not suffer their dead bodies to be put in graves. And they that dwell upon the earth shall rejoice over them, and make merry, and send gifts one to another, because these two prophets tormented them that dwell on the earth. And after 3 days and a half, the Spirit of God entered into them, and they stood up upon their feet, and great fear fell upon them which saw them. And they heard a great voice from heaven saying unto them, Come up hither. And they ascended up to heaven in a cloud, and their enemies beheld them. And the same hour there was a great earthquake, and a 10th part of the city fell. And in the earthquake were slain men 7,000, and the remnant were affrighted, and gave glory to the God of heaven. The second woe is past, and behold, the third woe cometh quickly." The two witnesses. This is the second woe. So they're given power to prophesy 1,260 days. How long is that? I'm going to give you a hint. You must know all Jewish months are only 30 days long. Not like ours, that are 31, and then one that's 28, possibly 29 if it's a leap year. They don't have that. Yeah. All of their months are 30 days long.
About 3.5 years.
3.5 years. So here we are again. We already had the temple. And we already seen what happened at the temple, trodden under the foot by the Gentiles for 3.5 years. Well, now we see the prophecy of these two witnesses for 3.5 years. So during this time, before the Gentiles come into the temple court, these two witnesses are going to prophesy for 3.5 years. And their prophecy is not just going to be to Israel, it's going to be to the whole world. The prophecy that they're going to have, the prophetic utterance, the prophetic ministry that they're going to have is going to extend to the whole world. Now, before I get into who they are, we're going to find a description about what it says about them first. First, they were clothed in sackcloth. Now, what did we say about sackcloth? We talked about sackcloth before. We talked about it back in chapter 1 and chapter 2 of Revelation. We talked about sackcloth.
Like, why did they wear it? That's what you're talking about?
Yeah, what is it, period? Not just why they wore it, but what is it? What is sackcloth? Sackcloth is something. What is it?
Like the material.
Huh?
About the material.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, what's the name? Can you think of the name of the material? But it's like what you said, something similar to like a crocosite or something like that.
Okay. Okay. There's something special about it.
It's dark.
Something like a wool, something like, it's sort of itchy, something.
Not so much wool, but more like, as Sister Paula said, like a croaker sack. Yeah, it's sort of, it's itchy, you know, it's because it's supposed to be mourning clothes. But there's something special about it. What color is it? Black. Sackcloth is black. Remember, we even talked about sackcloth as far as the sun, that it looked like sackcloth, black. When we talked about the sun being blackened out, it was clothed in sackcloth, it was black. Sackcloth is black, and it's usually used for mourning, or penance. When a person is really sorrowful for something, they would put on sackcloth and ashes. You would hear of kings. We went back into the kings and we saw David. He was clothed in sackcloth and he would put ashes on his head to show mourning, to show sorrow, really repenting over something that was done. They would tear their clothes and they would put on sackcloth and ashes. And that was to bow themselves down in penitence, to say how sorry they were. Well, sometimes it became a formality. That they would do it so much, it was just like, okay, here's the show. And that's what they would do. Those people that were outside of Jairus' house, they were professional mourners. And when Jairus came up, they all came out there, oh, your daughter, she's dead, oh, no, no. And they just carry on. And Jesus said, no, she's not dead, she's asleep. Now, how do you go from mourning to laughing? Just like that. It was a profession. They were hired out professional mourners. They would come and just mourn. Oh, you just hire them, give them a certain amount of money. They would come and just cry and mourn and make it so sorrowful and everything else. And then you give them the money and they leave. Well, that's why when Jesus spoke, they switched just like that. Come on, are you crazy? What are you talking about? She's not asleep, she's dead. And Jesus put them all out. And then when he went in and said unto her, Tabitha Kubi, that is, young damsel come forth, and she came forth, and they took her outside and gave her something to eat, they didn't laugh then. He told them she was just sleeping. She was not dead. Because he brought her back. So they would put on these mourning clothes. Well, these two witnesses have on these clothes, these sackcloth that they wear around. They're also described as two olive trees. What does that mean? What does that mean? Olive trees. Where do we plenteously find olive trees? Or we find a lot of reference to olive trees. In fact, Jesus cursed one. It was a fig. In this very places, there was an olive grove. Where do we find olive trees? Most plenteous in the world. One place. Israel. So this reference gives you their nationality, that they're Hebrew. And then it says, and their candlesticks. What did we learn about the candlesticks? We learned something about the candlesticks. What are the candlesticks? Way back in Revelation 1st chapter, Jesus told us what the candlesticks were. And the candlesticks are always the same. The Bible will make reference to itself, tell you what itself is. And the only thing you have to do is just replace it each and every time. Whenever that symbol comes up, replace it with what it already says it is. Churches. So these two olive trees are Hebrew and they're types of churches. There's two types, which we're going to talk about in a minute. So I'm going to tell you right now. And we find that in 1 Thessalonians 4. It says, fire came out of their mouth to destroy enemies. Could you imagine talking to somebody and all of a sudden fire came out of their mouth while you were arguing with them, fussing with them about something, telling them what they're not, saying that they don't belong to God, cursing them, and all of a sudden fire comes out of their mouth and you're destroyed? Let's go to 2 Kings 1, 10 to 12. I like this. 2 Kings 1. This one was always funny for me. 2 Kings, 1st chapter. Starting at the 9th verse. Actually, you can start at verse 8. This is what sets the tone. He said, and they answered him. He was a hairy man, and girt with a girdle of leather about his loin. And he said, it is Elijah the Tishbite. So he had sent out, they were trying to find out who this is that was on this mountain. And they came back and gave a description to this captain of the host. And he told them, described to them what he looked like, hairy man with a leather girdle on. Oh, that had to hurt. And because he was hairy, he said, that's Elijah. So, okay. So the king sent unto him a captain of 50 with his 50. And he went up to him, and behold, he sat on top of a hill. And he spake unto him, thou man of God, the king has said, come down. Elijah answered and said unto the captain of the 50, if I be a man of God, then let fire come down from heaven and consume thee and thy 50. And there came down fire from heaven and consumed him and his 50. So guess what? He couldn't go back and tell them that that was the man of God, because he got burned up along with the 50 that came with it. Elijah spoke, fire came down. That's a clue. That's a clue as to one of our two witnesses. So, also again, he sent another captain of 50 with his 50. And he answered and said unto him, O man of God, thus saith the king, come down quickly. Elijah answered and said unto them, if I be a man of God, let fire come down from heaven and consume thee with thy 50. And the fire came down from heaven and consumed him and his 50. So all 51 of them died. So they weren't able to go back and give a report. So every time they came to Elijah and said, man of God, come to the king, he said, if I be a man of God, then let fire come down. Now, how were they going to lead him out to go tell the king that this was the man of God? That was the sarcasm behind it. You can't even leave the mountain, because if I'm the man of God, then fire going to come down and get you. And fire came down and consumed them all. So they couldn't even leave the mountain. Here's the smartest one of them all. Verse 13. And he sent again the captain of the third 50 and his 50. And the third captain of the 50 went up and came and fell on his knees before Elijah and besought him, saying unto him, O man of God, I pray thee, let my life and the life of these 50 thy servants be precious in thy sight. Behold, there came down fire. Behold, there came fire down from heaven and burnt up the two captains and their former 50s with their 50s. Therefore, let my life now be precious in thy sight. And the angel of the Lord said unto Elijah, go down with them, and be not afraid. And he arose and went down with them unto the king. If they had kept coming, he'd have kept burning them up. So that's a key as to what happens here. They speak, and fire comes out and burns up the enemy. So when the enemy tries to come upon them and say things to these two witnesses, fire comes down from heaven and consumes them. So who can stand against them? So you there trying to stand against them, you prophet, I'm going to kill you. Fire just come down and consume you right where you stand. So what you going to mess with them for? You know, why would you? But people are going to contend with them anyway, thinking that they could get by or do whatever, and fire is going to come down and wipe them out. Here's the thing. Here's another one. They have power to shed heaven. For the whole time of their ministry, they have power to shed heaven. 1 Kings 17. We had one of our people that does that. His name was Elijah. The first 3.5 years of his ministry, the heavens were shut and it did not rain for 3.5 years until the people were selling pigeon dung. They weren't selling pigeons, pigeon dung on the wall. Scrape it off the wall, and they were selling it. I said, you have to read the Old Testament. Well, there'll be some stuff in there, some stories. You be going like, oh my goodness, how debaucherized. Yeah, because it had not rained. They were trying to find any way they possibly could to get water or to find some source of something wet. So they reserved themselves to pigeon dung. Because Elijah set up heaven. So they rained. So they were in a drought. A major drought for 3.5 years. But Elijah drank up a whole brook. He was sitting by the brook, and the ravens was bringing him food. Until he got tired of that, went to a widow's house with her son, who was about to kill herself, said, no, just make cake for me. And then God will take care of you. And she made the cake for him, and God took care of all of them for the rest of their time that he was there. She never wanted for anything. As long as the prophet came by, she had food. She cooking food, make for her son, and for the prophet. And they ate. But everybody else was in a drought. They had water. They had whatever they needed. Again, a hint as to who these two witnesses are. F. Power over water to turn into blood. And that's taken from Exodus 7, 17 to 21. One of our other people had power to do that.
7 what?
17 to 21. So this part here is describing who these two witnesses are. Then the last one, they could smite the earth with plagues at their will. It's another clue. So I need you to tell me, who do we know of? What two people do we know of that fire came down when they spoke against their enemy? They have power to shut heaven. They have power over water to turn it into blood. And they can smite the earth with plagues as often as they will. What two people do we know of that possess those particular characteristics? Elijah and Moses. Some people try to say that it was Enoch didn't have power to do anything. Enoch did nothing. He just walked with God. He fell so in love with God, walked with him so closely, God said, you can't stay here. And just took him into heaven. He didn't demonstrate any power over anything. He just loved God. And he just loved him so much. For 65 years, he just loved God. God said, you can't stay here. You got to come with me. And he just came down and got him and took him into heaven. Took him away from his family, kids, everything. No, just took him right into heaven. Enoch just loved God so much. So it couldn't be Enoch a part of this. And the only two that we see appear with Jesus in Matthew 19 is Elijah and Moses, telling him, comforting him of things to come. So all that points to these two witnesses being Elijah and Moses, because of what they possess, the characteristics, the fact that they're Hebrews, and the two types of churches. I told you 1 Thessalonians 4, 16, 17. The two types of churches. For the Lord himself shall descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of the archangel, and with the trump of God. He is the first church, and the dead in Christ shall rise first. That's the first church. The dead in Christ shall rise first. Moses died. Jude. It's only one chapter, so I can say Jude. The book of Jude. I can't say Jude, second chapter, third chapter. No, it's only one chapter. Verse 9. It says, yet Michael the archangel, when contending with the devil, he disputed about the body of Moses. Does not bring him a railing accusation. Didn't call him evil, didn't say he was a liar, didn't say nothing. He just said unto him, the Lord rebuke you. And took the body of Moses. The Bible tells you in Deuteronomy that the people of Israel went up and down in the mountains for 50 days looking for Moses and could not find his burial place. Because Hebrews tells us that God buried him and then God raised him up. That's the first type of church. The dead in Christ rise first. Moses was a typification of the New Testament saints that die in Christ but get up out the grave first. Then the second one, look at verse 17. Then we which are alive and remain shall be caught up together with him in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so shall we ever be with the Lord. Elijah was the second type of church that don't die. What happened to Elijah? He was what? Caught up in the chariots of fire. He was caught up because Elisha saw him and got his mantle and got double for his blessing. So Elijah was the second type of church, those that are alive and remain. So that's why they're the two types, the candlesticks. They're typifications of the church. The church that are alive and remain, and the church that's dead but shall rise up. Because each of them typified that. And we know that they're alive because we see them standing with Jesus. Before his resurrection, we see them standing with Christ on the Mount of Transfiguration. So he's there. And because of them, those two being there, we know that these two witnesses are Elijah and Moses. Because of the power that they possess and the things that they do. These two were Elijah. Fire came down, destroyed his enemy, power to shut up heaven. That was Elijah. Moses, power over water to turn it into blood, power to smite the earth with plagues as much as he felt like. That's Moses. That's why I said, these here tells you who these two are and gives you clues as to who these two witnesses are. This gives you their background, that they're going to prophesy, they're in sackcloth, they're olive trees because they're Hebrew, because we know both of them were Hebrew. And then here's what they do to tell you who they are, to let you know that's definitely not these other people that have nothing to do with Enoch. Enoch did not display any authority or power as these two did. We have testimony to them as to what they did. Any questions, comments over these? Now that we've identified the two witnesses. Any questions, comments? All right. Next week, we will not have a Bible study because of the Thanksgiving holiday. And we will be stuffed with turkey and tryptophan and going to sleep. Because that's what's in turkey, tryptophan. That will make you go to sleep. Yeah.